Welcome everybody to the Atlantic World Art Fair 2022 online program. We are delighted to continue to offer this series of online engagements that intend to develop understanding of and appreciation for Atlantic Caribbean art, contemporary art. The program explores institutional and alternative approaches to regional art practices while making connections between the past, present, and future. And if you have missed any of our events, please check out our Atlantic World Art Fair YouTube channel. Today, we focus on the topic of creating alternatives for contemporary Atlantic art. And my name is Lisa Howie. I'm the founder of the Atlantic World Art Fair and Black Pony Gallery. I will be presenting and moderating today. But before I begin, I'd like to introduce my colleagues and friends. And I'll start, please, with Natalie. I met Natalie, it seems like moons ago, at the American Association of Museums conference in Miami, and I've been inspired by your work ever since. We can go to the next slide, please. Natalie Urquhart is the director of the National Gallery of the Cayman Islands and currently on secondment as Chief Executive Officer of the Cayman National Cultural Foundation, where she's leading the organization's transition. She's worked within the regional cultural sector for 20 years, specializing in developing creative strategies, programming, and exhibitions for arts organizations. In 2019, Urquhart established the Cayman Islands Biennial, the country's first multi-venue tri-island art project, and in 2021 launched the inaugural Cayman Art Week in response to the impact of the pandemic on the creative sector. She's the immediate past president of the Museum Association of the Caribbean and continues to serve on MAC's executive committee, where she works to expand regional networks. She's a former core committee member of Tilting Axis and a member of the Cayman Islands National Cultural Policy Committee, representing the visual arts, fashion, and creative industry sectors. She's the recipient, no wonder, of several national awards for her services to the cultural sector. Welcome, Natalie. Delighted to have you.
Great to be with you today, Lisa.
We also have Blue Curry with us in the next slide. He's having some technical difficulties, so we do hope he's able to join us. Blue and I met at Tilting Access in Miami, and whenever I get to London, I try to connect with him. And most recently, my husband and I had the pleasure of visiting his new space in Hackney, which he'll be speaking about. Blue was born in Nassau, the Bahamas, and he's an artist working primarily in sculptural assemblage and installation. He has exhibited at the Tate Britain in their recent Life Between Islands exhibition, also the Victoria and Albert Museum, Liverpool, Site Santa Fe, and Jamaica Biennials, the Caribbean Triennial, the Art Museum of the Americas, World Bank, Museum of Latin American Art, among many others, and he works between London and the Caribbean. Ruby Cruel is his very cool art space in Hackney, London, that he started in 2019 in response to the lack of opportunities for artists to work, show, and exchange. And it's formerly a barbershop. The space now comprises a studio, gallery, and living accommodation, facilitating exhibitions, events, and artist residencies. And this artist-led initiative is currently in the final stages of a complete renovation and will resume activity in the summer of this year. Welcome, Blue. Now I'd like to shift to Annalee Davis. I also met Annalee actually at Tilting Axis in Miami and was inspired and continued to be by her passion for and knowledge for the region, not to mention such a talented artist and an architect as well. Annalee Davis has a hybrid practice as a visual artist, cultural activist, and writer. She works at the intersection of biography and history, focusing on post-plantation economies by engaging with a particular landscape in Barbados. And to qualify what I mean by being an architect, she's a builder. In 2011, Annalee founded Fresh Milk, an art platform based in Barbados. In 2012, she co-founded Caribbean Linked, an annual residency in Aruba, cohering emerging artists, writers, and curators from the Caribbean and Latin America. In 2015, she co-founded Tilting Access, an independent visual arts platform bridging the Caribbean through an annual encounters. And in 2020, she co-founded Sourgrass, a curatorial agency that works with artists and creative practitioners from the Caribbean and across its diaspora. Sourgrass was featured in the Atlantic World Art Fair in 2021, and we hope that they return. I'm delighted that you're all joining me today and sharing your insights on your alternative projects. As you know, I'm going to lead off because I'm still blabbing away. So I'm going to lead off and talk a little bit about the Atlantic World Art Fair, and then we will hear from Natalie and then Annalee, and we hope Blue. Thank you all. when did you start talking about this, thinking about this? When did it start? And I was dreaming about this. We can go to the next slide, Latoya. I was dreaming about this for many years and really wanting to create a fair that was specific to our Atlantic Caribbean region. I was aware of the good work being done at other venues, such as Amanda Coulson's Volta, but I wasn't aware of any specific art market devoted to the region, and meaning the wider Atlantic region, which would also include Bermuda. And the dream of the fair kept running up against the wall. And this image comes to mind of exorbitant shipping and duty costs, crazy rental fees for space, storage, transportation, you name it. And I guess I was feeling a little bit about like this figure in Meredith Andrews' wonderful photograph. And the next slide. And let's face it, thinking about trying to actually build an Atlantic World Art Fair in Bermuda, when really no one knows anything about Bermuda except the Bermuda Triangle. And so I was looking at how am I possibly going to inspire people to travel here for an art fair when they really know us for peak sand beaches, little shorts, and golf courses. We have, I think, the most golf courses in the world for 21 square miles. So instead of trying to build a castle that'd be washed out in the next wave, I took stock of what was actually working in the world. And this is what's so funny about this project is I already had Black Pony Gallery as a virtual art gallery successfully growing on Artsy. And then all of a sudden I had this aha moment that this is where the fair should be. It should be online. So I took the concept to Artsy, and they loved it. And they were like, we can go to the next slide. And they literally like, well, you need to do this right away. I was thinking, oh, well, I will make this proposal in January, February last year. They'll say, sure, we'll position it next year. And they literally said, it's now, it has to be now. And so I jumped into fourth gear. I secured a title sponsor. Thank you, Butterfield. And I then I kind of went wild for several weeks. I think I lost 10 pounds. I went wild for several weeks trying to find gallery partners who would, first of all, would be able to kind of like jump on my schedule. Everyone's working, of course. There's exhibition schedules are planned for weeks and months and years ahead. Anyway, secured a gallery partners who really understood what I was talking about, who understood the vision. And yeah, we led off with this wonderful image from Lissandro Surreal, and the first iteration took place from June 1st to the 15th, 2021, and it lives on as an archive on the website as well as on Artsy. And our goals, we get to the next slide. Our goals for the Atlantic World Art Fair are quite simple. This is how it looks right now if you haven't checked us out online. It's quite simple. Number one is we want to make the world know and love our artists. We need to make critically necessary cash. And we need to be working together in order, my perception is by working together, we can be stronger. And I think that we can see from one Atlantic World Art Fair to the next that there is simply so much talent in the region. We are really only featuring a portion of it. This year, we are 12 galleries in our projects featuring 353 artworks by 94 artists. We want our artists to be discovered by curators from all over the world. We want to hear that the artists in the fair have been invited into these fantastic world traveling exhibitions and must-see biennials. And we really hope that the marketing reach of the fair has positive career impact. We know that it's critical that we also find ways to connect with art collectors who may not be able to visit each of our islands or continental-based locations. So really, how great is it that Artsy reaches 4.5 million art collectors who can surf our artwork catalog while they're having a bath? So all the audience has to do in exchange is given their email address, and then you get this really great big art experience that you can dip into as much as you like, whenever you like. Another uptick is that the hard work to produce the fair is time well spent collaborating with these ladies, uber connected, super dedicated entrepreneurs, curators, scholars, and museum professionals. And by working together, we amass decades and decades of collective experience, and that's fabulous. And we're seeing that reflected in the program. We're developing essentially a library of, we hope, panel discussions and touch points where our audience members can, develop understanding and appreciation for the region. So it really is the beginning. If we go to the next slide, we look at our little Instagram page as it's developing. We have almost 1,000 followers. And it looks like I should probably be following some more people. But really what I'm looking to see and excited to be talking about are welcoming more galleries and art projects who believe in our goals. I'd love to be able to create a boutique hybrid online on land model that also stays true to our island cultures. And I'm really praying for more partnerships and investors who believe in the work and will help us to blow it up in a positive way. One of such partnerships I'm pleased with and really excited about is the Fountainhead Arts Residency. It's the next slide. How great is it that one artist from this fair will go to Miami for the month of May 2023 and take in all that Fountainhead has to offer. And for the data heads out there, here's a happy chart that's showing last year's reach as far as South Korea. Reaching 5,000 unique visitors is very good. But the overachiever in me is looking for hundreds of thousands for unique visitors and 50 more countries. But, as our artsy rep says below in that quote, we are already surpassing what we did last year, and that's really inspiring. So ultimately, when the fair lands, and I really hope that everyone who is watching and supporting will make that trip to visit us and bring wads of cash and bring lots of friends and family. It's working. Let's go to the next slide as I conclude. And it's still in the making, and it's very exciting. So please don't tell anyone about the Atlantic World Art Fair. Please tell everyone about it. And thank you, Dee Dee Brown, for providing this beautiful artwork for my close. Thank you so much, and we'll pass it over to Natalie. And in the end, we will have open conversation.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for your wonderful opening of this fair. I'm going to have to stop laughing now because I love the fact that you make this informal, collegiate, inclusive, and it feels really great to be here today, both with yourself, a longtime friend and colleague, and of course the wonderful Annalee Davis, and Blue somewhere in the ether. I know he's going to be joining us as well, but both artists and cultural animators that I have respected and had the chance to work with on occasion for many years now. So it's great to be here. Speaking of hybrid, I think I'm here today in a bit of a hybrid space. Obviously, my day job is director of the National Gallery of the Cayman Islands. So I am an institution, or I work within an institution. And that has been my primary focus for, 20 years now. And of course, working alongside MAC as a sort of institution association as well. And Cayman Art Week, of course, is really on the flip side of that. So I think I'm here today to talk about alternative spaces, but I wanted to sort of put out there as well, my day job museum is quite alternative as well. It's very flexible and very responsive. But speaking of responsive, of course, this is what Cayman Art Week is. It's been great to watch both Lisa and your Atlantic World Art Fair emerging out of the pandemic. Annalee, looking at the amazing work that you've done, and of course, Fresh Milk's collaboration with Catapult in 2021 was, I think, one of the most inspiring things I saw to come out of the pandemic. So I think, we look at the global challenges that the pandemic has wrought and will continue to for many, many years, but also some of the positives that came out of that moment, surely of anxiety, but of course, mental space as well, I think in many respects, and giving ourselves the moment to really maybe try out the ideas that we'd been thinking about for such a long time, but just not being able to fit into our very, very busy schedules. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it was a very creative moment for many of us to have that pause and to be able to execute some of these projects. One of the things I was doing during lockdown as a museum director was really looking at the way that our government was supporting creatives in lockdown. And we had this very unusual situation in that we had a very passionate Minister of Culture, but he was passionate about supporting the music sector. So musicians were all being very publicly given financial grants because, of course, there was no concerts going on, but they'd entirely overlooked the visual arts sector, which our museum is primarily responsible for. So it took quite a lot of lobbying as a museum, advocating for grants from government, but then also trying to match those grants because they were woefully smaller than the musicians' grants with funding from the private sector. And I think our museum has always sort of lived in that space of trying to be responsive to the needs of the art community, not just from the museum education standpoint, but if there is a gap, looking at ways to try and fill it. But of course, we have a limited remit, we have a limited staff, and they were all adapting, their entire careers online and doing great work. But we had this big space, I think, within the wider community about how we were going to provide support directly to the artists and, of course, commercial galleries in this moment when our borders were closed. The Cayman Islands had borders closed for a lot longer than many other islands, and really the drying up of any art sales, because we do still rely predominantly on the tourist market in the Cayman Islands for the sale of artwork. Cayman Art Week, of course, is not an original idea by any means. I've been inspired by art weeks all over the world. I've been able to very fortunately attend many of those, always looking for creative ideas that we can bring back to our smaller country. And then also closer to home, things like transforming spaces that Antonio Roberts kicked off in Bahamas was always something that was really inspiring to me, both from the day job, but looking at alternative ways to connect our arts community in the Cayman Islands. And we don't really have a very mature art market in Cayman yet. So looking at your fair, looking at a model like an art week was very, very much about trying to create a space for a more mature art market to evolve coming out of the pandemic. If we can move on to the next slide. My slides today are literally illustrations of how Art Week transpired last, and maybe the next slide as well. Thank you. We can halt there, I think. So in July of last year, a bit like your fair, Lisa, we decided to do this, or I decided to do this with very, very sort of short turnaround time. I think all of us on the panel are the sort of people that grasp an idea, want to make change, and tend to run with it, even though we have multiple projects in the air. I know Annalee is definitely one of those, and Lisa, of course, you are too. So I kicked off in February of 2021, looking firstly at sort of building a website platform that would serve all of the commercial galleries and, very importantly, open studio spaces in Cayman, because we hadn't really had a very developed concept of open studio visits, tours to studios, etc. We'd really relied very much on a handful of commercial galleries. And, again, per capita, we have quite a lot of commercial galleries in Cayman, but again, very much directed at the visitor. So looking at a platform initially and a social media platform that would support the website, we now have a site that has every single commercial space. There's a Google map. We have contacts for each of those venues and sample artworks of the artists that they represent. And then we also are featuring various pop-ups. And again, this will evolve now that the fair has just launched for June this year. So you'll get to know the galleries both in advance of the fair before you visit, but also it's a great way for visitors overseas and locally, of course, to get to know those venues that they might not have otherwise visited. So once the website was launched, we went live in sort of late March. So again, we had a very small window of about 3.5 months to pull this together. And we wanted to make sure that it was July because it was really very much the moment that the support was needed. It would have been fine to sort of push it back to something like October, but we were very much trying to respond to the immediate needs of the art community by not wasting too much time. And next slide, please. And these slides really just illustrate some of the responses to Art Week. Just in terms of statistics, I think my vision for this really started off much more like transforming spaces with maybe a 2-day event, maybe 50 to 100 people taking a bus tour and a handful of venues. And we were very quickly at 30 venues, thousands of guests, and several major sponsors. So it turned into a very big annual sort of almost national level festival very, very quickly because the demand and the need was there. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was getting back out into the community, getting to do studio visits, which of course, in my day job as a director, I often don't have time to do. And really speaking to artists one-on-one, finding out what they needed, finding out sort of what they'd gone through throughout the pandemic and ways that we could support both as the institution. And then, of course, Cayman Art Week, which I didn't mention at the beginning, is just a volunteer project that I lead with an amazing volunteer team of 3 people. So it's done completely sort of aside from the institution, but it is really there to support the work of the National Gallery as well. So getting out there, listening to the artists, finding out what they needed. Obviously, the project was bigger than Cayman Art Week in terms of advocating to ministers, connecting artists to collectors as well. But it really then formalized around a week in July, around for 5 days, and had, I think, in total about 35 events running simultaneously, both in Grand Cayman, and this was very important to us, Little Cayman and Cayman Brac. The Cayman Islands are actually 3 islands, and often our sister islands get left out of these big national festivals. I think really sort of to talk about the event itself and how it transpired, what we were very keen to ensure that we didn't do, and again, this was really capacity, and this is an answer to one of your questions that we'll talk about later on about how to be sustainable with these types of projects, is we're not trying to be an exhibition space. We're not trying to produce content. We're a platform for other galleries, artists, pop-ups, interventions to happen through our platform. And we're there to help promote, make connections, ensure these things run smoothly, put the buses on, but we don't create content. And I think if we try to do that, and of course we're very tempted to because we all have creative ideas, it really would take us beyond our capacity. So this year, Cayman Art, we literally just launched publicly yesterday, so the timing is great. We will be moving it forward to June this year, which is a bit of a sort of more sustainable month because it straddles both the visitor season, but also the local season before everyone sort of starts going on summer vacation. And it was very important to us from day one that this was really designed as a local festival. Of course, borders were closed at the time, but the response was, incredible, even without visitors. But now it will continue to expand. And really, we're collaborating with the tourism department to make sure that we share this very, very widely. Couple of takeaways. I'm not sure how I am with time. Lisa, flag me when I'm ready. Couple of takeaways, though, again, not kind of overextending by creating content. Helping artists find empty spaces. Again, this is not an original idea by any means, but for our small country in Cayman, we have a real estate boom that makes it very, very difficult to find affordable studio spaces, pop-up gallery spaces, etc. So the role that we played as Cayman Art Week, again, was to connect or find the local empty venues, work with landlords, take responsibility for organizing that, and then collaborate with artists that were looking for pop-up spaces. And I think, the pop-up spaces themselves were among the most exciting in the Art Week schedule. And again, looking at the development of an art market or even an association for the commercial side of the art sector in Cayman. This is really what Cayman Art Week is trying to champion, because there's no arts association, there's no gallery associations, there's no museums associations. So really the institutions are responsible for doing a lot of the work. But of course, institutions can't and shouldn't do everything. So it's really hoping to formalize some of those relationships with commercial galleries, looking to support each other rather than seeing each other as competitors, and trying again to help develop that sector in a more professional stance, I think, is one of the outcomes. But I mean, it was very successful. We sort of not raised, but sold. And again, our model is to secure sponsorship so that we don't have to charge any participation fee to the artists or the galleries. Again, that is sort of going to be revisited every year, making sure that we do have the funds to support it. But in total, we raised $250,000 CI dollars. So that's more than US, which is a good sign, of sales. And those went directly back to the artists and the galleries themselves. We saw 100% galleries, pop-up studios reporting sales. We saw, this was a really interesting one, 65% galleries experiencing a new visitor demographic. And I think that was one of the most positive takeaways for us, is that we put on bus tours. So in the evenings, we focused on a different district in each of the sort of Grand Cayman and the Sister Islands each night. So we had Cayman Art Week North, Cayman Art Week Central, Cayman Art Week East, and then the Sister Islands. And so there were bus tours put on for anybody to use, again, free admission for the bus tours. And what we weren't really expecting is that what the bus tours did was give people a comfort level to kind of walk into any gallery space and feel at home. And I work as, again, I said I work in a museum, and we're all aware of how intimidating museum spaces or art spaces can sometimes feel to people. So I think that was a real takeaway. It's creating a way of accessing that was community-based, that was collegiate. You'd walk in with a big bus group of people to any of these spaces. And we had kids, we had seniors, we had every walk of life really enjoying those spaces and feeling very, very welcomed as well, which I think was quite transformative. Back to the statistics again, we rate 75% reporting an increase in social media traffic. Those are the venues as well. 30% receiving additional commissions after the sales, which we didn't include in our total. And really just, again, every single venue signed up for the following year at the end of 2021. So I think that this model, just in sort of closing, having worked in the Caribbean for 20 years through amazing projects like Annalee and Holly's Tilting Access, looking at art magazines, very early days, online presence for sort of contemporary art, transforming spaces in the Bahamas. And actually, Antonius Roberts has a really wonderful new space called Project Ice that I just visited in the Bahamas. There are so many artist-led or creative spaces that we're seeing popping up. And some of them don't always last forever. They have a lifetime, which I don't think we should be afraid about as well. If they're there as a catalyst for other developments within their communities, I think that's fantastic. But I think often we're looking at the academic, the developing side of the art sector. But we're all aware, as you are with this fair, Lisa, that the market itself and the sales component is absolutely critical. And it's often not overlooked, but maybe it's not given the same kind of support even at a government level because it's a commercial venture. But I think that's the takeaway for Cayman Art Week, is really to look at models where we can support the sales of art, we can develop a collecting community. The National Gallery did a series of webinars and seminars during Art Week about collecting, how to get into the market, a lot of the background, more academic side of collecting, and really pulling together partners from across the island, looking at bridging the tourism and cultural market, which has a challenging relationship at times, certainly from the museum side of things. And then also reaching out to people like the Minister of Investment and talking about creative industries, which have so much more maturity in places like Jamaica and Barbados, but for some of the smaller ones are really sort of getting left behind. So we're looking to, as I said, start again in June. We have a great response, a lot of new partners coming on board to support us offsetting costs for anyone to participate. And we're hoping that this helps really build a longer term art market for Cayman that is a much more professionally and maybe contemporary art based, rather than just, wonderful paintings to take home with you when you've come to enjoy the sun, sand and sea. So we're only in year 2 and we will be back to talk to you again in a couple of years to let you know how we're doing. Thanks, Lisa.
That's fabulous. Those are formidable results from a first go around, particularly when you said that you were thinking maybe you'd have 1,000 people. And then, your traffic was absolutely enormous. Your community was clearly ready for it. And to generate $250,000 in sales across 1 week is exceptional. And so, really commend you on that. You've got my wheels spinning around.
Well, it's a model that anyone could do, right? And I think this is the key thing. We'll talk about this when we get to the dialogue section or the conversation, because it is designed to be sustainable, and maybe even pass around to different committees. I think that's something we should talk about as well, so we don't get that sort of volunteer burnout. I do apologize. I had a lot of other slides with beautiful pictures of people engaging, but I completely forgot to press go. But you get the general idea that it was very well attended. So again, and I think one thing I didn't say, Lisa, but the emerging artists really were able to get involved in this, open up their studios. Again, lots of different opportunities for different levels of professional careers.
It's fabulous.
That was my concluding one with someone taking home a painting. That happened a lot on these bus tours. We had to fit the artwork into the bus. It was quite amusing.
I love that as a trouble. There's no art space.
A good issue.
Wonderful. Annalee, I think we may just continue, and love to hear your commentary on your slides as well.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Lisa. And it's great to be sharing the virtual floor with Natalie and hopefully Blue. And not seeing his joyful face will make me be a little more mature than I would have been had he showed up here. So I wanted to talk about building bridges, making space, and shaping community. And I think what I'll share today is a little bit about Fresh Milk and some of the internal programs that has then sort of spawned some other projects collaboratively. So I'll talk also about Caribbean Linked and Tilting Access. And then I'll close with the more recent initiative called Sour Grass. And I just want to say at the beginning that these projects are really all inspired by the capacity that all of us here Many of us in the region are kind of seeing ourselves and the work we do as being citizens of change and transformation. And I think this current moment that we're living in the world, it requires that artists and cultural activists and instigators are even more urgently needed to transform the public sphere. I wanted to kick off with a quote from Antonio Benitez Rojo, who speaks about how the Caribbean carries this desire for social, cultural, and psychic integration to compensate for the fragmentation and provisionality of the collective being. And I think that's something that kind of really informs the work that I've been doing through Fresh Milk and these other initiatives. This slide is a small wooden building here at Walker's, where I live and work. It's was originally a 17th century sugar plantation. I built it as my studio, and then it kind of was taken over by Fresh Milk. I came back to the Caribbean in '89 and felt quite isolated. So I then, along with a number of Barbadians, co-founded something called Representing Artists in '92, which was a union. And it developed a newsletter. Just 6 issues were published, but it was kind of a precursor. I speak about it because it was really about collectively working. And it was really, I think, one of the first initiatives in the region that was really spanning linguistic divides through this very humble newsletter. And it was, for me, a very important precursor to the formation of Fresh Milk, which I then founded in 2011. At that time, I want to acknowledge the work of Natalie Maguire-Batson, who was really important in the first year. And since then, the work of Catherine Kennedy. Next slide, please. Fresh Milk was really born out of my existential crisis around teaching at BCC, when I realized that close to 100% of our graduates were not making work within a year of graduating. And in 2010, I had a really special group of students. There were about 10 or 11 of them. And I kind of panicked when I sort of thought, we can't afford to lose what they're doing. And Fresh Milk was really set up as a kind of an experiment to harness some of that talent and to build a bridge from their tertiary level training to becoming a professional artist by providing opportunities, which would have included workshops on grant writing, how to apply for a residency, taking part in a residency. We have hosted close to 70 residencies since 2011, from Barbados, from around the region, from around the world, including 2 Turner Prize nominees, Helen Kamak in Cooking Sections, and Alberta Whittle, who I'm sure all of you know are currently representing Scotland at Venice, although I think she's representing Barbados. And on the left of this slide is the launch of the Trinidad publisher's book called See Me Here. It was a panel discussion that Fresh Milk hosted with Russell Watson moderating. The editors, Melanie and Melanie Archer, was here, along with Barbadian artists whose work was in that publication: Ewan Atkinson, Jocelyn Gardner, Sheena Rose, and myself. On the top right is one of the public programs with Torika Bolatajici, who's an Indigenous Fijian Australian resident artist who shared the residency platform with a Barbadian artist, Anissa. And I think those kinds of twinning of people is really important, because they feed off of each other, and then these kind of organic things start to happen that are obviously beyond our control. The image at the bottom right is Transoceanic Visual Exchange, which was conceptually developed by Natalie Maguire, and is continuing to be run by both Natalie and Catherine Kennedy. We have worked in partnership with artist-led initiatives in New Zealand, Nigeria, China, Australia, and most recently Teoretica in Costa Rica. And this is basically bringing new media and film to these partnerships, and through the public programming and conversations, and this idea of curating in a kind of a horizontal democratic way that Catherine is advocating for. It's a really beautiful program that we're very proud of. The next slide, please. The Catapult Program was a project that Fresh Milk was invited to be a part of by Kingston Creative. It was an Open Society Foundation funded opportunity specifically for artists during the COVID period. And out of these 6 or 7 programs, Fresh Milk managed 2 of them. One was a stay-at-home residency for 24 artists, which meant that over a period of 8 weeks, I think, artists were funded to stay in their studios and to produce work. It's been very beautifully archived by a series of newsletters, so they would report on the work that they were doing. So this is just a slide from the website showcasing artists from Jamaica, Trinidad, the Bahamas, Barbados, Guadeloupe, Puerto Rico, Dominica, and the DR in that particular iteration. And we also hosted 32 lockdown virtual salons and have worked with Natalie in some of these things as well. So this was a way to bridge people like Natalie, curators, directors of institutions, to be in live conversations with artists from around the region. And that was a really great program. Next slide, please. Fresh Milk is currently one of a number of international initiatives that are participating in something called the Healing Arts Initiative. It's a call to action in response to COVID. It's a collaboration developed by culture runners, and it's part of the World Health Organization Solidarity series of events that is connected to the United Nations 75th anniversary. And we're working locally with Future Centre Trust, which is an ecological not-for-profit, and Adopt to Stop, and have commissioned through an open call 3 Barbadian artists, and Anna Gibson, Anya Graves, and Dion Graves, to make new work for this fantastic trailway project that is, I think it's just about 1 kilometre at the moment, but it will be a 17-kilometre trailway that runs on this historic piece of government property where the train used to operate in the early 20th century. And that's becoming a kind of a space for active, healthy outdoor activity on the interior of the island, outside of kind of coastal activities. And so we've commissioned artists who will be doing work that will populate that environment. The next slide, please. Tilting Axis was co-founded by Holly Bino and myself in 2014. It's specifically informed by the perspective of the artist-led initiative. It recognizes the Caribbean as central rather than peripheral to anywhere. And it has been a bridge for those both living and working across the archipelago and those in the diaspora. We have had the immense pleasure of working alongside a stellar group of thinkers who've been part of the core team, including Natalie, who's here, Tobias Ostrander, Lise Ragbeer, and Mario Caro. We have hosted annual gatherings from 2015, which had particular kind of thematics for discussion, and would basically include, panel discussions, pop-up artist presentations. But then, of course, a lot of the important stuff happens outside of that. And I recall one of our core team members, Lise Ragbeer, who is of Trinidadian parentage, born and raised in Montreal, currently based in Austin, Texas, saying that as somebody in the diaspora, coming to Tilting Axis meant that she didn't have to explain anything about who she was. And so it became this kind of magnet for Caribbean people. We hosted the first iteration here at Fresh Milk, and then we moved to the Perez Art Museum in Miami. Natalie hosted did an amazing job at hosting the issue at the National Gallery of the Cayman Islands. We then went to the Dominican Republic and to Guadeloupe. Next slide, please. This is our gathering at Centro Leon in the Dominican Republic. That happened in 2 cities, in Santiago and so both in the city and somewhere out. So it was very ambitious logistically, but it was a really great gathering of people from kind of all linguistic parts of the region. Next slide, please. Our last gathering was in Guadeloupe at the Memorial Act. And I think really these annual get-togethers have created these very intimate, I think this is what people have liked about it, they're these very intimate kind of discursive spaces that allow us to think about how we can contribute to and create more inclusive and equitable art worlds, bringing together really artist-led initiative that is the underbelly of this gathering, along with people from the private and state sector, artists, writers, and curators. So this was a day of tours going out in Guadeloupe. This was the museum set up for St. John Pearce, who was a son of the Guadeloupean soil and a writer. The next slide, please. One of the incredible outcomes of Tilting Axis, which is very close to my heart, is the fellowship program. And it's been specifically developed for Caribbean-based creatives to access professional development opportunities in the region and outside of the region, to broaden their networks. A lot of these fellows are curators. There isn't a tertiary level, formal tertiary level training for curators in the region. So it's understanding that the curators are a critical part of the cultural ecosystem, because without them, we don't have people advocating for, producing scholarship on, exhibiting, understanding the work that artists are making. Here we have at the bottom right, Nicole Smythe-Johnson, who was our first fellow, supported by British Council, St. Andrews College, and Mother Tongue. Natalie Willis at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, who was supported by the Art Gallery Black Studies at the University of Texas, Austin. Lissandro Suriel, who was again supported in a program with Mother Tongue and St. Andrews College. Sean Leonard from Trinidad in our most kind of recent and ongoing partnership with Het Nieuw Institute, which has an incredible group of partners that includes the Amsterdam Museum, the Stedelijk Museum, de Appel, Kunstituut Meli, and the most recent fellows, Fernando and Anadis from Cuba. Our open call is currently out. It's an incredible fellowship. It comes with a purse of 12,000 euros. You're based for 3 to 6 months in Rotterdam, and you have access to the archives that all of these institutions offer and support. And it's a very, very special program. And what has come out of that from Sean's experience, who was selected during COVID, who never got to go to Suriname or the Netherlands, did his entire fellowship remotely, but then was invited by a duo called In Search of the Pluriverse to be the scenographer for a major exhibition that just opened a week or so ago at Het Nieuw Institute. And his interest in, as the co-founder of Alice Yard, and his interest in the yard and playing has informed his work as a scenographer at Het Nieuw Institute. Then we have Caribbean Linked, which is a beautiful residency hosted by the indomitable Elvis Lopez, who is the founder of Atelier 89 in Aruba. This is a collaboration that came out of Fresh Milk and Art. And it builds awareness across all linguistic parts of the Caribbean. It basically brings in artists from all linguistic regions and links them with a curator and a writer. They basically live and eat together and make work for 3.5 weeks. It closes an exhibition. Our 6th iteration takes place in July with artists from St. Martin, Barbados, Aruba, St. Vincent, Cuba, the Cayman Islands, Puerto Rico, and Guadeloupe, with a visiting curator from Mexico and a writer from the Bahamas. And we form partnerships with spaces like the National Gallery of the Cayman Islands, who can then support a local artist that, you know, when I think about, if you go to the next slide, I always say that these young artists come in as islands and they leave as an archipelago. And it is such a magical thing to witness unfold. And they maintain these beautiful relationships, and it kind of creates all of these organic things that happen. And I have to mention that Marguerite and Harit, who work with Atelier, are kind of angels in the Netherlands that find funding for this. And of course, Catherine and Holly, who are critical to the administrative arm of that. Next slide, please. Sour Grass. I'll just go through this quickly. It's the baby of the projects, recently born, co-founded by Holly and myself. Our first project, next slide, is with the Rotterdam-based Kunstituut Meli. Next slide, please. Our project with Kunstituut Melli was to develop 3 solo exhibitions of Caribbean-based artists at the Melli, which is an amazing opportunity. This was the work of Jasmine Thomas Girvin from Jamaica, who's based in Trinidad, next image. And her exhibition was called Bathed in Sacred Fire. It was very well received. I don't have time to really talk about why and how, but that will just give you an idea. The next slide, we had robust public programming. Here is Marianne Marcelo, who was a Winti priestess, who led a procession as part of our project called Laying a Table for the Ancestors. Next slide. And that event closed with a conversation between Jasmine Thomas Girvin and Olive Senior, who is Jamaica's poet laureate and has been very influential in Jasmine's work. I would say in closing that Sour Grass has also just formed an alliance with The World Reimagined. It's a project managed by Ashley Ajayi. It recognizes the United Kingdom's relationship to the transatlantic slave trade, and our role was to recommend 5 Caribbean-based artists who would be on residency. Some of them are there now in the UK, producing these globes designed by Yinka Shonibare that are part of over 100 globes that will be exhibited across the United Kingdom. That includes Carol Sarando from Dominica, Tamika Galanis from the Bahamas, Jasmine Thomas Girvin, Rodell Warner from Trinidad, and Rasakim Ramsey from Barbados. And in closing, I just wanted to say that of course, it takes a village to do all of these things. I'm very much part of a community. None of this is done singly. And in my own mind, I'm thinking about how we transform these kind of post-plantation spaces and believe that regeneration is possible in a historically traumatized site, and that I'm really standing on all of the work that has come before to kind of metamorphose this region that we care so very much about. Thank you very much.
I mean, honestly, there's just so much going on there, and there's so many things that you're able to accomplish. I commend you, and I know you're saying it, you're not on your own, but it does take a lot of lifting and courage to go forward with these. And it's wonderful that I love you identifying your angels who are in the Netherlands, who are assisting that project. I wish that we had the capacity to put links up into the chat, but I think we'll have to circle back, somehow communicate to our listeners how they can get involved and what's sort of the list, because I think we're naming a lot of organizations.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I feel like this talk may need a bibliography, which would be like how to learn more about. And that could be something that we put up, for example, I don't know if it's an Instagram post or on the website, because the deadlines are coming up. As you said, that your Tilting Access has an open call right now, and I don't know what the date is. There's a gentleman asking a question. I'm going to just go into it just quickly, because he's asking about emerging artists and how they get access. So I think that's something that we do need to speak to directly when we get through the conversation. So let's turn to Blue. Blue has created a movie to show the transition of his space in Hackney. Blue, can you hear us? Maybe not. Latoya, if we can go to his movie and let's at least observe what he's put together, which I think is visually quite self-explanatory, how we can see that, as he said in his bio, that it was a barbershop and that he had exhibitions and art projects. And I thought to myself, when I saw these pictures, oh my gosh, look at this space. This is crazy. And it's really interesting to see how he was able to use it as a gallery and then transition it, as he's doing right now for this renovation. Because what I stood in when I was there just a few months ago was nothing like what this looks like. I also think that where he's located in Hackney, and I can't believe he's not able to speak, but I don't know Hackney very well, but I was impressed by just our little walkabout around the community, was to see how there's this really youthful, creative energy. And of course, Camden is not too far from it. And I think he's really onto something in terms of having this like wonderful, well-lit corner very, very visual, very obvious as you're driving up, and he's really transformed Tony's. I know there must be commentary for him to say about his logo changing, but it's nice to observe the creative just from that side too. Lou, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me, Lisa?
Yes.
Oh, amazing!
Just
I will. All right. Well,
Kate Terry.
um, I'm struggling to hear you, but if you think you can hear me, I'll just keep talking.
Yes, please go for it.
Hi. Yeah. Apologies that you're not seeing me. I think I'm having some technical difficulties on this side. But I guess following Annalee, that's a tough act to follow with my small fledgling project. But
He keeps dropping off, so our apologies, everybody. But you know, as the story continues to unfold visually, we can see how he sheared the walls back to the original brick, dismantled the yard, and then continues to build into that space that he created in the back, and that's where there's this really cool a freestanding artist residency space where you can, there's a little kitchenette on the basement area where he's mapped out the stakes there. That's actually the residence that goes up 2 stories. And it's really quite remarkable that with this very narrow plot, there's so much light. He pushes through the roof as well and creates a loft area and has opened up a skylight so that the light goes all the way down to that ground floor and where the doorway was.
Wow. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I didn't think at all that it was a small project, actually, Blue. I think Solanas and I were quite overwhelmed because outside we were looking at this sort of papered windows and he has the Ruby Cruel sign. You have no idea what you're walking into. And because he has opened up the roof, as you can see, this extension up top,
Wow.
The column of light that comes through and this kind of sense of expanse, it almost seems impossible that you've kind of come into something. And I think that's, to be honest, I think that's actually some of the effect that we were to achieve in a museum. And so you can see how it turns into this much more contemporary space. There was something he had said, I can't remember, about this black material that was very smartly chosen because it's going to naturally be an insulator and a coolant or something. There was something about it that seemed quite smart. I hope, Blue, I'm getting it right. And then leveling out the floor.
It has it looks a little bit like galvanized paling as well. So there's a kind of a Caribbean,
yes,
I think visual reference to that, which is really lovely.
Yeah. And I think, Lisa, maybe it's important to talk about why he felt the need to open this space as well, right? Because we were talking a little bit before. Blue was with us for a short period of time, and creating these alternative spaces in these, huge cities where, that we might have very high-end commercial galleries. There are institutions, but the competition to get into the institutions is just overwhelming, even for an artist as established as Blue. And I did just see Blue in Life Between Islands at Tate, which was a beautiful exhibition, and the work looked amazing, Blue. So if you can hear us, congratulations. Yeah, but I think it's critical, and in the same way as Hackney, it is as important for us to be thinking about these alternative spaces like Fresh Milk in Barbados, which is just such an uplifting space. And the work that you've done, Annalee, has just been incredible. When you said 2011, that's over 20. That's over 10 years, right? Over 10 years.
Gosh, 11,
I got away from you there for a
years.
Well, you've cut 20 years into 11 years. But I think just Blue, and if you can hear us, commending you on a massive amount of work that has gone into transforming that space. And just so excited to see the program as it launches in summer and beyond.
Yes, and a great. I mean, he's saying you can hear he's really frustrated. Sorry.
Sure.
That also, this is, I think what I'm watching around the world here with all of us so committed to our region is how much we push ourselves in. And that whatever it might look like on the outside, there's so much of our personal time and investment. And I mean, someone sort of made this crass comment to me around selling art as if I'm making some kind of money, like that they are a cash cow from them. And I thought, oh my gosh, you're really not at all understanding the business model. Like there's so much about it that's a not-for-profit, because
your business model, particularly,
it isn't that it's a fail. It's that that like you had mentioned sort of earlier, that the gender, Natalie, thinking about how our governments are almost setting us up in this way that's such an uphill challenge, because funding is going into like the millions for sports and on the tens of thousands for art and culture. And so our cultures and communities have really not necessarily actually even understood it as valuable. So our work and project is always around this constant community push to get that engagement and to get that investment.
And I think we were talking about this last week. I was on a Catapult committee talking about artist grants in the region. And we were talking about the challenges, again, it depends on which island you are based. Some islands do have grant opportunities, but my country, which is considered to be, a wealthy country, doesn't necessarily trickle down into the arts. And there's only one public grant that people can apply for here. The National Gallery sort of works with organizations like Caribbean Link to fund residencies. But if you're looking just for grant money to develop a project or a program, and I came up against this myself with Cayman Art Week, there's only one organization that does have grants, and all of the other sort of grants based here are for different types of community and social subjects. So I think looking at the idea of sustainability, organizations like Fresh Milk and the work that Annalee puts in very much voluntarily at many times, I know Annalee, and fighting for those grants. I mean, a lot of that goes on behind the scenes to provide these opportunities. But we do need to think about sustainability and succession planning and, all of those things. If you are doing this on a voluntary basis, like how can we make it more sustainable and continue expanding the work and the opportunities for the artists in our communities?
I just want to jump in. Sorry, Annalee, 1 second, because I just so I can see this. Blue is saying, he says, I just wanted to plot a new point for the Caribbean outside of the physical region. And that is, he says, he's opening this summer and the building works.
So what? The building works?
It works.
Yeah, it's beautiful and very courageous and bold. I love it. Well, I was just going to, piggyback on what you were saying, Natalie, and that the issue is if we don't have a more robust cultural ecosystem, that then the succession planning is quite difficult. And so I think then that these projects tend to have a shorter lifespan, which is, this is something that I'm also, this is one of the questions I think you wanted to maybe raise, Lisa, is what some of the challenges are. It's understanding that some of these projects have a shorter lifespan. So Fresh Milk may not be around for 20 years, these Caribbean Linked may not be around for 20 years, but, it's, and I guess in a big country, we may also be seen as a small town, as a population of 300,000 people. So the reality is that can be kind of challenging, which is why working in a pan-Caribbean way is so critical. That you can join up.
Yeah, in Bermuda, I mean, we're up to our debt. I actually don't have any idea how Bermuda will resolve its debt. We're in the billions, and yet we still don't qualify for CARICOM UNESCO grants. And I would love to be able to write for a grant. It's just amazing how excluded we are for whatever sort of reasons. That perhaps we're set by guidelines that are actually no longer real.
Well, one way to do that is through collaborations with islands that do qualify, right? And I think there's a lot of potential there. And this idea of, we keep coming back to collaboration. We can't exist in isolation in our communities. As Annalee says, 300,000 is about 3 times as many people as we have in Cayman. So we have maybe 6 people trained in the arts at, administrative management level. But I think if I can speak very selfishly, it is through the collaboration meeting you, Annalee, years ago at Fresh Milk. I think
Yeah.
you exhibited at the National Gallery before that, but that was before my time. And being open to those networks, and then working to keep the networks going, both for the organization, but your own space and your own artists, and kind of really working hard to build those opportunities, I think. And I think one of the things I was thinking about when Annalee was speaking is also taking the time to support those colleagues. So we're not just going into it for what we can do in our own space, but making sure you show up to panels like this, show up to Caribbean Linked, or support Caribbean Linked if you can, spread the word on social media. I think there's so many things that we can do that are relatively simple and not cost-driven, that we can do to kind of keep helping sort of produce support for these different initiatives. And I think joining the team at Tilting Access, Annalee, it was really transformative for me as a professional, because I couldn't get that kind of conversation in my own country, and that's changing, which is fantastic.
And I think we're seeing, in spite of the challenges, there are so many incredible things happening and so much work being produced by so many amazing artists across the region. And what we're also seeing is the impact in the diaspora. In the US, for example, and I think the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, has been a game changer for so many things, but you're seeing artists of color or curators of color that are being appointed to senior positions of major institutions, many of whom have a thread, an umbilical cord that takes them back to the Caribbean. And I think in that way, we can also see that there may be some benefits coming out of our kind of growing network of people who will kind of cast light on and, want to collaborate in other ways. So, certainly the space has changed a lot in the last couple of decades. We can see that.
Yeah. We have some questions. So I think we should jump in. I think we should go back to Henry. I'm assuming Henry's is the first name versus has Ron. How can emerging artists that do not have access to local galleries because they don't exist in the community, like Turks and Caicos, access the opportunities via Artsy or Atlantic World Art Fair? Well, I guess I would start with just to say, write to us. And part of it is to make sure you've got a portfolio together, or perhaps a website or an Instagram, to be able to demonstrate what you're up to, where you're going. And because several of the galleries, like myself, for example, I'm not just focused on artists in Bermuda, nor is Turn, nor is Susie Wong Presents, right? So there's a lot of opportunity that can be shared around. And yeah, I think that on the side for artists, it's really just to make sure that you have your own space created and you can really present your work in a thoughtful manner. The next question is there a source list for international grants? I started a nonprofit arts organization in Exuma, Bahamas. Well, first of all, San, congratulations. And I don't know what that is. Maybe you should type that name in so we can put it up, say it out loud for you. I've not heard of it. And to be honest, I've not even been to Exuma yet. So we were just saying earlier that I think that this conversation demands a bibliography that we can share with everybody somehow. So we will put that together. I'll follow up with an email with everyone who's been included here. And that list might exist already. So don't necessarily need to create new work, but it is an interesting question. I was speaking with the Caribbean Association of the World Bank, and Nzinga is her first name. And Nzinga Werner, I think is her name. And we were talking about this very issue of where is the resource list for all of these projects happening all across the Atlantic, and how difficult it is to put your finger on what the information is. And there doesn't seem to be a resource list. It sounded like they were going to be working on one. So I will circle back to her as well. So San is saying Exuma Arts Network, founded a year ago. Well, we'll have to write that down and we'll check you out.
And Lisa, if I can add, and I'm going to do a shameless plug now for the Museums Association of the Caribbean, but MAC is an organization that is not just museum based, and the conference, I think the annual conference, which is again a great place to meet other people working in the Caribbean, in the nonprofit sector, in culture, I think in the wider sense, so in arts organizations, botanic parks, universities, etc. And their conference, or our conference, is going to be in Nassau in March of 2023. So while I know that's on a completely different island to the one that you're on, it might be worth looking into that. And I think MAC has some scholarships for first-time attendees, or people that haven't joined the network before. So jump on their website, and I think it's maybe $50 US or something to join as an individual, but you might be able to access some of that grant information via Mac as well.
Nice tip. Absolutely. Annalee, any thoughts on tilting access?
You mean in terms of a grant?
No, the next
the next iteration of tilting access. Certainly nothing happening this year. I'm not sure. I feel like the jury is still out on intra-Caribbean travel. One of the issues, of course, is the increasing cost of travel because of the surcharge on fuel, which makes, traveling in and through and across the Caribbean quite challenging. So we don't have a confirmed partner or a date for the next iteration. The focus really is on the fellowship at the moment. And I know that really supports one person, but that's what we can manage. I would like to think we could do it in the future, but I don't have any solid updates for another in-person meeting, which would be so much fun.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm missing it, actually.
Yeah.
I feel like when I watch those photographs, I'm like, oh, I didn't get to move into the one. And now I'm like, we really need to have another event.
It's a way to plug in to your people. You know, it's a way to plug into an energy source that then carries you for a while. So it's a good one.
So San is asking, can you repeat that? That was a tip about the Museum Association of the Caribbean, and to go online and connect with them.
I think the website is caribmuseums.com, but if you can just Google that probably.
Nice. Well, I was going to
go for it. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to go back to have a look at some of the questions that we had prepared. In fact, everyone seems to really have actually answered most of them. I was thinking about advice, this last one about sort of tips, and I think, Natalie, you kind of covered some of them. Knowing your capacity, I think, is a good thing. It's funny, though, about knowing your capacity.
Lisa and I talk about this a lot offline, going, so what are you doing today? Another massive festival. And it is. I think we're all people, and Blue included, I'm going to speak for him, even though he's not on with us on screen, is that we're all sort of problem solvers, right? We see a gap, and if no one else is doing it, I'm probably so frustrated that it's sitting there that we try and jump in and create an opportunity out of it. And I don't think that's going to change, but I think, we've had a lot of conversations about balance and wellness. Annalee was, we talked during lockdown about really trying to just shut down, turn off the phone, which is really difficult, and actually just stop for a minute, take a pause, because if we're creative people, even if we're sort of doers, you have to have that pause to kind of recharge that creativity. So I think it's trying to carve out a balance. I'm not suggesting for a second I actually know how to do that, but I'd like to. So that's advice for myself. But there was a great question about what would you say to someone trying to start an alternative art project? And I know we've spoken around that. But I think that would be kind of a great one to sort of conclude with as well. We've talked a lot about relationship building, about networks, and about how important it is to really be in touch and support your colleagues, because I think if you don't have that, it's very difficult to kind of kick something off in isolation. You'll be able to do it for a few months or a couple of years, but you really need that collegiate support, I think, to be able to do that. And I think that's really why we've been successful with a lot of the projects that we've started. It's by calling up a friend and saying, what do you think about this? Do you know anyone who can? How can I get a grant? And not be shy to ask those questions and call on all of those colleagues that you've pulled together. It's always great to have, a core partner in terms of a local company or someone that can support maybe just in kind or with a space. So not being afraid to go out and ask, I think, but once you've got your business plan together and it's authentic and it's doable. But I think that the power of partnerships really cannot be undervalued.
I wanted to say something about how important it has been for me to be mentored by younger people. I think having a multi-generational working group is really important. And I say that often to Catherine and Holly, who I work with, on a very regular basis, but also many other people that come through Fresh Milk. I also want to say something about a code of ethics, because I think, we talk a lot about decolonizing our spaces, but sometimes we don't treat each other very well. And I think it's not just what you do, but it's how you do it. It's how you treat people. It's how you host. It's being respectful. It's being honest. It's being transparent. It's thinking about, you know, kind of democratic ways of leadership or co-leadership. And also trust. There's a lack of trust in a lot of the art communities, and it's finding ways to build trust. And yes, slow cultural work is something that I've been thinking about for the last couple of years, how to do things more meaningfully and more deeply. And your network, and really doing absolutely nothing on your own, because you can't.
Yeah. And it is a challenge. You have to almost make sure sometimes you have your armor too, even though you're going in and trusting. Sometimes you've opened yourself up too wide, and then you get hurt. And that's the balance that I'm developing and learning about myself. Blue was saying, though, he was talking about giving yourself enough space to have your own practice and your own life, in terms of finding that balance. But no, these are all really good tips, and I think that, you know, starting something new is a risk. It's always around measuring up those risks, and having that. I try to see projects 1, 2, 3, 5 years, and not kind of be overshadowed by doubt, because once doubt trickles in, it can actually feel like you can get overwhelmed by that. And that's why I think when you go back to your network, is that we're always going to encounter the naysayers and the people who don't understand us or haven't interpreted our version of work, or even how we presented ourselves. Just have to keep pressing on and believe that what you're doing is right. I have this little stone that a colleague gave me years ago, and I need it.
What does it say?
It says believe.
Oh.
Yeah. You know, these little talismans that we have, you know, we need to have them around us to keep ourselves focused and strong. I recognize that we're 10 minutes over the time. I want to thank everybody for their attention. Thank you for the questions that did come in. And we do hope that this has been inspiring and useful for wherever walk of life you're coming from. And that if you do have a project up your sleeve, please be sure to reach out to all of us if you wish. We'd love to hear them. We'd love to know how we can maybe work together with you. And ultimately, I think that, as we've said, working together, we will be able to accomplish more and do it better. Ladies, thank you again.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Sorry we didn't have Blue more present, but we feel your spirit and energy, Blue. And congratulations on Ruby Crude. It looks amazing.
Absolutely. We will have to meet in Hackney at some point soon, too.
Definitely.
Yes. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks,
Natalie.
Thank you, Lisa.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.